Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Coming up, China and the United States have held a semi-official dialogue to offer renewed perspectives on bilateral ties. Iran and Oman discuss joint shipping routes in the Strait of Hormuz and mine-clearing missions. The Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces say they have dissolved following a merger with the Syrian army. And China's new traffic safety law is set to clarify liability for fully automated cars. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. First up, China and the United States have held their third Track 1.5 dialogue in Beijing. Both sides expressed the need to strengthen communication and dialogue and enhance mutual political trust. Some 40 Chinese and U.S. representatives participated in the dialogue, including personnel from the Chinese government, think tanks, and universities, as well as members of the U.S. strategic and business communities. The Track 1.5 dialogue mechanism was established in the year 2023 to bridge official diplomacy and non-governmental exchanges between the two sides. So for more, joining us now on the line is Ina Tingen, Senior Fellow with the Center for International Governance Innovation. So thank you very much for joining us, Ina.
It's always a pleasure.
A senior Chinese official said at the dialogue that both sides should reject zero-sum games to achieve healthy stability with well-managed competition and seek common ground while bridging differences to achieve normal stability with controllable disagreements. Do you think the two sides are moving in that direction?
Well, this particular 1.5 track is, but this is not representing the Trump administration. So there's idea on the Chinese side is to continue the dialogue, to keep it open. On the U.S. side, it was interesting. It was mostly very heavy on the Asia Society. Both Thornton and the former Australian ambassador to the United States, Kevin Rudd, were there. They were, saying, well, let's try to manage the competition. They're saying all the right things, in many ways a mirror image of what the Chinese side was saying. Unfortunately, it really doesn't match what the administration is saying and doing as we speak.
According to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, the U.S. delegation described the bilateral ties as being at a unique juncture and highlighted the friendly interaction between President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump as the most vital and valuable component of the relationship. So, Ina, do you agree that the bilateral ties are at a unique juncture?
I do believe they're at a unique juncture, but I think there's a disconnect. This is about two countries, not about two individuals. Donald Trump likes to play up. He's friends with everybody in the world who's important. But the fact is he's alienating most of the people and countries out there. And when you look no further than what's going on with Canada right now, where former neighbor, staunch ally, has now said that this full-on economic war. So this idea that somehow whether we're friends makes all the difference, no, it doesn't. And this is something where I think they're trying to do the best with what they have. This is something that Donald Trump believes in, so they want to keep the dialogue going. I'm talking about the American side. But it's echoed by the Chinese side. They want to keep the dialogues going because if you stop having dialogue, you could have miscommunications, escalations, sleepwalk into a very bad situation. So at this point, the Chinese side is, I believe, consistent, saying exactly the same things they've been saying to all these meetings. And the U.S. side is just, I can only imagine being in their position while they're here trying to spread goodwill and talk about how important the relationship is. And then Scott Bessent is seemingly burning down the house globally with his new sanctions regime.
In a Monday meeting with some members of the U.S. delegation to this Track 1.5 dialogue, Wang Huning, chairman of China's top political advisory, said China stood ready to enhance correct mutual perceptions and respect each other's core interests. So, to China, what do you think should be the correct perception of the United States? And on the other hand, to the United States, what do you think should be the correct perception of China?
Well, I mean, they're two very, very different things. I mean, China is simply saying, look, we don't want to dominate. We do not want to be a hegemon. We do not want to take the place of the United States. What we have is a situation where you view us as competitors. That's fine. Let's manage the competition. Let's keep talking. Let's make sure this doesn't become overtly military or you make it political. That's very different from the US side, which is basically seeing China as a threat, has issued multiple papers saying that containing China is the most important thing for the United States. So you have very, very different perspectives. The question is there a third way? Is there a way to bridge these understandings, given that Washington is not going to change? You start looking at both sides of the political aisle, and they both identify China as the problem. So even with Donald Trump gone, it's highly likely that you're going to have somebody there who perceives that China is a threat to the hegemony of the United States, and they believe that hegemony is necessary for world peace. So, but China is, they're saying, well, maybe there's a position in between, and that's literally where we try to find ourselves. And I think that position is going to be put around this issue of finances and economy, because the fact is the United States can't separate from China. China doesn't want to separate from the United States. It's just a question of finding the right balance.
So, in other words, in your opinion, to say the least, Aina, it is largely the U.S. perception of China that has gone wrong.
Oh, absolutely. People say I'm biased in that, but the fact is it is the U.S. that is attacking China, and not only China. I mean, if this was everybody in the world versus China, but it's quite the opposite. Besson is attacking 60 entities and countries with this latest round of secondary sanctions for anybody who's doing business with Iran. Obviously, China's high on the list. And it's the U.S. is consistently attacking other things. Like I said, go back to this issue of Canada. Canada is not a threat to the United States. Yet Trump has said he wants to make it the 51st state. Obviously, the economic negotiations have completely broken down. And this was the closest ally and neighbor to the United States. So this is not just the U.S. attitude towards China, it's the U.S. attitude towards the world. It finds itself on the decline, a declining hegemon, and it's pulling back and kind of thrashing around and somehow saying that the loss of economic and military might of the U.S. is the fault of everybody else.
So, as you have already mentioned, Ina, on Monday this week, the Trump administration announced the fresh economic sanctions on entities, including some entities based in Chinese mainland and Hong Kong, to try to raise pressure on Iran's economy. How much will this particular action from Washington test this goal to build a constructive China-U.S. relationship of strategic stability?
Well, you see, this is one of the problems. China tends to see things that Washington, the Trump administration, does as somehow strategic, as somehow part of an overall game plan. But you have to remember that Donald Trump is battling record low polling. His popularity is at the absolute bottom. He has these Epstein files, which he seems extremely concerned about. He also has poor economic performance, high gas prices, spats with all his neighbors, a war that he cannot control and he's doubling down on. So I think it would be a mistake to see this as purely about the China-America issues and see it more as Trump doing what Trump does. When he's losing the war in Iran, he doubles down by saying, I'm going to go back to sanctions. Well, the irony here is that if sanctions were going to do it, he said he had the mother of all sanctions during his first term, and that was going to bring Iran to its knees. And he also had secondary sanctions as well. It didn't work. So it's kind of, this isn't working. Let's go back and do more of the other thing that didn't work. And so I think really China needs to view this as this is separate politics, domestic politics. Having said that, if you start looking at the past, every time there has been a meeting planned around a week before, the administration will throw out something unusual, provocative. This is a classic Donald Trump. He thinks he can kind of destabilize his opponents by throwing some spanner into the works. Somehow this will give him an edge when he comes into the meeting. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's something that is aimed at China, specifically at China, closer to that meeting. But this, I think, really do think is domestic politics.
So, by the way, what is your takeaway from the members of the U.S. delegation to the dialogue this time? How much real influence do they have on Washington's policy making?
Zero. Kevin Rudd was the person that Donald Trump said, "Where's that Kevin Rudd?" And Kevin Rudd was sitting across from him. Made it clear he didn't like him. So he had to eventually leave being as ambassador to the U.S. He went back to the Asia Society. Thornton's from the Asia Society. There are business and academics there. These are all good people, but they don't represent in any way, shape, or form the Trump administration. They are echoing some parts in order to try to soften what they see as a difficult situation. Imagine being them, as I said, you come over in good faith and you're trying to do the work of bringing two countries together, and then you have Besant basically throwing gasoline on a wildfire, which is making it more difficult. So they're doing the best they can. It's, as I said, keeping the dialogue open as important as what you achieve at this point.
At the second track 1.5 dialogue in 2024, the two sides agreed that they should adhere to peaceful coexistence and avoid conflict and confrontation. And of course, back then, it was during the administration of Joe Biden. Now the two sides are talking about building a constructive relationship of strategic stability. So in your understanding, Ina, is there actual difference between peaceful coexistence and a constructive relationship of strategic stability?
Not really. You have to remember, regardless of the words, you have to look at the actions of the different entities. Joe Biden was ideologically opposed to China in the sense that he saw it as evil because the system does not reflect America's system, and he saw China as a competitor. In his thinking, he remembers back to the 70s when his dad had a good job and he could put kids through school and have a house and save a little money. And he says, somehow the Chinese were involved in taking it away, despite the fact that he should know it was American corporations who decided to leave America, not China. China didn't steal jobs. But very different from Donald Trump, who sees China as a commercial competitor. Somebody who's vying for the same real estate. So he sees us in a very different things, and he's willing to use different tactics. He's not thinking really long term. He's not ideological. It's simply who's king of the hill, who can get the best deal. So coming at it from very, very, very different perspectives, China's had to adjust because Trump is transactional. Biden was, as I said, more ideological. So you have to adjust to what comes through the the ballot box of America. And that's not just true for China, but the entire world.
Thank you very much for joining us. Ina Tingen, Senior Fellow with the Center for International Governance Innovation. This is World Today. Stay tuned.
Hello, I am Dr. Digby James Wren, a political analyst and international relations scholar specializing in China area studies. World Today offers unmatched in-depth perspectives on China's politics, economics, business, technology, and society. World Today's team of reporters and contributors provides valuable information from all of the world's major economies. I hope you can join me on World Today for the very best insights and news from China, on China, and help to build a better understanding of China's role in the world today.
You are listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. The latest OECD data are painting a mixed picture for the global economy. Economic growth across OECD members picked up slightly over the course of the second quarter. However, the Group of Seven, or G7 economies, moved in the opposite direction, with growth slowing to just 0.3%, down from 0.4% for the first quarter. Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the US all saw slower growth, while Canada and France performed somewhat better. So, is the G7 economy losing momentum, and what might this mean for the wider global economy? My colleague Zhao Yang spoke with Dr. Yan Liang, professor of economics with Willamette University.
So, Yan, the OECD says the G7 growth slowed to 0.3% in the second quarter, down from the 0.4% in quarter one. So, what does this tell us about the current state of G7 economies?
Well, I think this dip to 0.3% quarterly growth, it really shows that G7 economies are moving in a different direction, in the opposite direction than the broader global recovery. Because when you look at the OECD area, their growth rate actually slightly edged up from 0.4% last quarter to quarter one to 0.5%, whereas the G7 is moving towards the opposite direction. So I think there are many reasons for that. There are common structural, I would say, factors. Many of these advanced economies are suffering from slower productivity growth and also population aging, but there are also cyclical pressures, for example, the Iran war and the disruption of the global trading system. So I think, again, it just shows some of these advanced economies are losing some growth momentum at this point.
And 5 of G7 economies, namely Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the US, they all saw slower growth. So what are the common factors behind this broad-based slowdown?
Well, I think the common factors with all these 5 economies are there's stagnation of private consumption, especially in UK and Japan. I think the households are pulling back from consumption due to persistent inflation, but also, a slower growth in their wages. We're also seeing destocking on the business front, especially in the United States and Japan. Businesses are aggressively drawing down on their existing inventories rather than ordering new production. So the private sector destocking, I think, is contributing to the slowdown in those 2 countries. And then you're also seeing one of the common factors, which is declining in government spending, especially in the US and UK. And so that paired with, weaker business investments in Japan. And so that, I think, is really causing the loss of momentum. And of course, all of these have to do with some of the global factors, right? So for example, rising trade tensions, especially, the United States' tariff war, and then the Iran war, which I think created energy crunch and also disruption in supply chain. So these are the more, I would say, fundamental reasons for households pullback because of inflation and for businesses to face uncertainty and, refrain from further investments and also distractions, I would say, from governments, from their civilian spending now in the US towards more defense spending. So I think those are sort of the common global factors for all these countries.
And central banks are facing a difficult balance between supporting growth and keeping inflation under control. So how much room do they actually have to stimulate their economies?
Well, I think it depends on different countries, but I think for the United States, for example, the current policy rate is still quite high. For the federal funds rate, it hovers around 3.5% to 3.75%. So there's definitely room for that interest rate to go down. But because the US's inflation has been stubborn, still now the reading in July 2026 is 3.4%. And basically the US's inflation rate has been above the target, which is 2% for more than 5 years now. So even though I think there is, it will be beneficial for the economy for the interest rate to go down, but I think the Fed is going to holding the interest rate higher for longer because of this kinds of stubborn inflation. And I think for many European economies, their ECB central bank deposit facility rate has already dropped to now 2.25%, and the inflation is slightly above 2%. So Germany, for example, 2.8%, Italy, 2.9%. So there's really not too much room for the central bank to lower the rates. And then when you look at Japan, I think the opposite is happening in Japan. I think it's likely for Japanese central bank to raise interest rate to defend their Japanese yen value rather than cutting the rates. So I think in a nutshell, I think countries in the G7, I think they're kind of running out of rooms, either for the interest rate to further go down to stimulate the economy, or there is room for interest to go down, but the policymaker is hesitant to do so because of the high inflation.
And Germany grew only 0.2% in quarter two. So what do you think are main challenges that German economy is facing?
Well, I think Germany really suffered from economic stagnation due to many of these structural bottlenecks. So for one, I think the energy shock. I think Germany is facing a difficult position with the elevated, energy cost. And because Germany's some of the really, signature industries like chemistry, like some other, machinery equipment and manufacturing, all of these are energy intensive. So with the higher energy cost, it really, reduced the kind of industrial competitiveness of German production. And second is, I think, Germany continues to suffer from demographic drags, and also in terms of underinvestment, especially, the very rigid domestic fiscal rule, the so-called debt brake, which then really limit public infrastructure spending. So given all of these, right, energy shock, demographic drags, and the public underinvestment, I think that contributed to the relatively ongoing, right, long-term economic stagnation faced by Germany.
And for the U.S. economy, we know that the U.S. national debt has now surpassed the 40 trillion U.S. dollars. So what does this tell us about the sustainability of the U.S. fiscal policy and the health of the American economy?
Well, I think the difficulty here is the structure of the U.S.'s federal debt. So we know that, the Trump administration passed the One Big Beautiful Bill last year. And because there is very high, debt service now exceeding $1 trillion, even more than the U.S.'s defense spending. And so that kind of cost of service of debt is really taking away a lot of these resources, the fiscal resources. And also these, the One Big Beautiful Bill is giving tax cuts mostly to the rich and to the corporate. So that reduced tax revenues to finance some of these to fund some of these government spending. And in return, I think, the Trump administration is cutting a lot of some of the social safety nets, especially when it comes to, food stamp or Medicaid and others. And so I think in a way, this becomes, makes the economy a lot more unfair and, unequal. And it also, I think, in some ways, reduce the more productive investments that the government could have done. And a lot of these debt service payments are going to the rich bondholders. So all of these, I think, suggest that, the fiscal policy becomes a lot more regressive. And it could also limit some of the fiscal space due to the political pressure, to try to reduce the deficit. So I think those are really the problems. And again, the more so the inflationary pressure the economy has, the higher the yield is going to go up. And the more this is going to cost the US government to pay their debt service. And the more that would create the crowding out of fiscal space when it comes to spending in other priorities, be it in productive investments or in helping the general economy, especially the low-income folks and so on and so forth. So I think all of these would be, negative for not only the U.S. economy, but I think for the global economy as well.
And what do you think is the challenges of the U.S. economy right now?
Well, I think there are many challenges. I think this fiscal challenge is one of them. But I think the more important one now is really this AI financing, I would say, bubble, because a lot of these circular equity financing and also some of the very opaque and increasing debt financing, including, some of these uninvested grade equity and also a lot of the structured finance, the very opaque structured debt instruments and so on and so forth. I think that is also a major concern. It's not only because this creates financial vulnerabilities, but also because these large AI build out, right? The US is building, over 5,000 AI centers. I think that's a lot of waste of resources and also crowd out some of the other important, I would say, investments, right? So for example, energy. So instead of building, a lot of data center, I think the US should maybe build more energies and others. So I think that AI financing is also a major challenge.
Yan Liang, professor of economics, was Willamette University, talking with my colleague Zhao Yang. You are listening to World Today. We'll be back after a short break. You're back with World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Iran says it has restarted talks with neighboring Oman to manage the Strait of the Hormuz. The two countries say they have discussed a joint temporary navigational corridor through the strait and agreed to clear the waterway of mines. However, U.S. President Donald Trump says all mines in the waterway have already been cleared. Iran and Oman are holding discussions under a provision in the Memorandum of Understanding signed by Washington and Tehran in June. So joining us now on the line is Dr. He Wenping, Senior Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. He.
Yes, thank you for having me, Ding Hen.
Okay, so the discussion between Oman and Iran came a day after the Trump administration announced a so-called, economic D-Day campaign against Tehran. And previously, the U.S. leader has even threatened to bomb Oman over its discussion with Tehran regarding how to manage the Strait of Hormuz. So, do you think Oman can successfully walk this diplomatic tightrope? Do you think Washington's maximum pressure campaign here is going to force Oman to somehow abandon its traditional role as a regional mediator?
Well, actually, I think this now the deal being signed between Oman and Iran come us to give a clear answer to this U.S. this so-called maximum pressure campaign, so-called bombing Oman, so on and so forth. Actually, now this answer is very clear. Together, with Iran, that is, this Hormuz, Strait of Hormuz now should be in the hands of those countries around this strait. Obviously, it's Iran and Oman. So they have the right to control this Strait of Hormuz, not like U.S. Even Donald Trump before even saying, he declared saying the Strait of Hormuz already belong to the territory, of the United States. It's no longer saying that's an international public waterway. Now it's saying in the control of the U.S. So I don't think now saying Donald Trump this so-called maximum pressure campaign. Even mentioned they will bomb Oman, now push bomb Oman, now completely surrender, saying, okay, I'm no longer now even talk with Iran, totally surrender to the U.S. pressure. Now, obviously, it's another way around. We see now Oman very cleverly now team up together with Iran and come out with this, a new solution. Now they're saying they co-together to manage the Strait of Hormuz, and even come up with very clear precondition, and also what is the time, saying 1 or 2 months. This is a temperature one, but in the future, they will show now they are in the real control of this international waterway.
Now, Oman's proposed joint mission with Iran to clear mines from the Strait of the Hormuz is actually contradicting President Donald Trump's claim that the U.S. Has already cleared all the mines from the waterway. How do you read this intelligence gap? What do you think it reveals about the actual security situation on the waterway?
Well, those intelligence gap sometimes really confuse all the observers, confuse all those international, these companies and also the people in the world, because they not only conflicting with each other, sometimes even one side. For example, Donald Trump himself, today he mentioned one sentence, and then tomorrow he changed his own judgment, not mentioning another side also sometimes also happening. So it's a mixed information. All there, all the time. But if we go this specific one saying all the mines has been cleared, I don't believe that, because just 1 day ago, saying one cargo ships even hitting some saying this is some man already there. So the things are happening. Because plus the Strait of Hormuz is very big. It's not like one very little, like a river or stream, whatever. You can easily clean all of them. It's impossible. Even not for United States, for Oman or for Iran, I don't think all of them saying they can now saying clean all of them. This cannot be that 100% sure. Maybe you clean some of the part of the area, and then just a part of the area, but you cannot make sure saying all of them has been cleaned. So this is the reality. How we cannot just the one side and then believe one voice from one side and then believe another voice from another side. Also, they have their own purpose and they have their own, this motivation to share this message around to do the public influence the public opinion.
It looks we're seeing a line being drawn over navigation. Basically, the U.S. military is protecting a southern route through the Strait of Hormuz along the Oman side, while the Iranian side is demanding commercial ships and vessels use a northern route through Iran's own territorial waters. So, what would a temporary joint shipping route actually look like to you? Do you think it is operationally viable without explicit American support or U.S. approval?
Well, actually, it's quite hardly. Frankly speaking, if without the U.S. This support or approval, and only counting on Oman and Iran themselves, actually it's not easy. Because this agreement reached between Oman and Iran already made very clear, saying at least the precondition to make this deal can be implemented should be like U.S. lift those sanctions. Yeah, and also they are leaving. No longer saying, they block this Strait of Hormuz, saying, we are the charger, we are the controller here. So they are saying cannot. Before we have been witnessed already when the Iran saying we close the Strait of Hormuz, and then United States also send the Navy all over there to make another big close of the Strait of Hormuz, which means a big lock and then lock in the small lock. So one by one, make this Strait of Hormuz now becoming, almost closed. Very few ships can go through. So this is number one. Number two, we mentioned the big Strait of Hormuz. Actually, the south this way and the north of the way seems now one is dependent on Oman more, another side is dependent on Iran side more. So they need cooperation. That's exactly why Iran now want to talk with Oman even from very beginning. They are not saying, everything just in the hands of Iran side. They want to charge the fees for all those ships come over. And then they cannot because they know actually that side close with Oman even have a deep water. So for those big cargo ships, they even more go through that side with the Oman side. So they definitely need cooperation from Oman. But they have been doing this in a very successful way. Now the Oman, you can see obviously, they are not saying goodbye, Iran, I just talk with US. Now this is another way. They talk with Iran. Even come up with this agreement, exactly the timing chosen before just this so-called D-Day economic war, D-Day coming, which shows the attitudes in a very clear way. Now they know the neighbor you cannot choose, but far that, U.S., they are not in this region at all.
Thank you very much for your analysis and observation. Dr. He Wenping, Senior Research Fellow, joining us from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. This is World Today. We'll be back. You are listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. The Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces has announced the official dissolution of the group. Mazloum Abdi, leader of the multi-ethnic military coalition, says the group has completed its merger with the Syrian army and would cease to operate as an independent organization. The group lost most of its territory in northeastern parts of Syria to a government offensive in January this year. Later, it signed a merger deal with the government, which also included the recognition of the Kurdish cultural, civil, and educational rights in Syria. For more on this, my colleague Xu Yawen spoke with Dr. Wang Jing, a Middle East expert in Xi'an, China.
Dr. Wang, the Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, have announced their dissolution and full integration into Syria's state institutions, ending a decade-long period in which the US-backed group controlled large parts of northern and northeastern Syria. So why is this happening now, after years of Kurdish self-rule in the region?
Well, I think a lot of things happened during the past 1 year. On the one hand, is that the maintenance and the growth of the Syrian new government capabilities to maintain the kind of stability at home. Because we know that last year, actually, the Syrian government-led forces, they launched the major attacks against the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is SDF for short, their controlled area in northeast part of Syria, which led to the collapse of the SDF controlled area. And also, on the other hand, that with the stability maintained and growth at home, the Syrian new government led by Al-Sharaa, actually they got the support and the recognition more and more, not only from the Western world, I mean, not only from Germany, France, and the United States, but also they got the support from the regional countries. For example, Saudi Arabia, for example, the Qatar, the Emirates. And let's be frank, the major international community, they started to recognize the legitimacy of the Al-Sharaa and his government. And even the Russia, who once supported and still harbored the former leader of the Bashar al-Assad, now they also, to some extent, de facto, they recognize the legitimacy of the Syrian new government, and they just not long ago they signed a new agreement over the new status of the Russian military bases in the coastal area of Syria with the Syrian new government. So that's why, against this backdrop, the kind of the collapse and the SDF and this maintenance area is something that it become inevitable. So that's why I think it's the very miniature of what is happening during the past particularly 1 year inside Syria.
Then, in your view, what will this integration actually look like on the ground, especially when it comes to, military security restructuring? And also, how are the political, cultural, and even linguistic rights of Syria's Kurdish population expected to be implemented under this new framework?
Well, I think it's a very rather complicated problem, because actually for the Syrian problem, particularly Syrian Kurdish problem, it's very complicated because on the one hand, they have their minority rights, their minority ethnic particularities should be maintained and should be protected. But also on the other hand, we cannot forget that the Syrian new government, although in many people's imagination, many people's idea that their kind of the particular traits is so-called extremism, they actually try to transform themselves. They try to change themselves, the new characteristic. They try to change from the very extremism-led regime to a much more moderate, to a much more inclusive government. So which is, we cannot forget that, for example, at the very early of this year, the Syrian government, they published new laws, new articles, which stress the very high necessity of protecting the minority rights, particularly the Syrian Kurdish people's rights. So that's why I think everything is under change. We cannot project our imagination and our understanding based upon the old and outdated image over Syria government as well as Syria. Everything is changing very fast. So this is just, as we stress, it's just a miniature of what happened and what is happening inside Syria during the past 2 years.
Dr. Wang, let's zoom into U.S. factor in the situation here. So the SDF was once a key U.S. partner in the fight against ISIS and an important U.S. foothold in Syria. But Washington has recently moved closer to the new government in Damascus, including lifting a number of restrictions on Syria and also removing the country from its list of state sponsors of terrorism. Why has the U.S. changed course on Syria and SDF? And what does this move tell us about Washington's policy shift in Syria and also in the wider Middle East region?
Well, I think this is a very expression of the United States' latest understanding of what is happening on Syria. So I think it's very rational, rather rational, a choice based upon the major developments of the Syria. We have to know that the SDF, actually, as you mentioned, was a very important partner of the United States against the ISIS. And at that time, the Syrian government led by Bashar al-Assad, they were very hostile towards the United States. So that's why the United States cannot keep the kind of alliances with the Syrian government led by Bashar al-Assad. And also, on the other hand, the ISIS is still there. The Islamic extremism is still there. So they have no choice. Their only choice is the SDF. So that's why the United States maintained a kind of the close ties. But then after the new government led by al-Sharaa took power, they transformed the ideology, as we just stressed very clearly. They transferred from the very extremism to the very moderate. So that's why, against this backdrop, the United States also needs to transform, to choose. They want a divided Syria, and they want to maybe try the new cooperation with the Syrian new government. So against this backdrop, the United States finally they choose to give up their support of the SDF as well, and also on the other hand, the United States choose to expel Syria from the country of so-called terrorism supporting. So I think it's reflected the United States' very latest understanding and updated understanding over what is happening in Syria, and I think their choices are very rational.
Another thing is, Dr. Wang, the SDF dissolution could have implications far beyond Syria. For instance, like how could this integration serve as a model for Turkey's Turkish peace process? And for Iraq, what might it mean for Iraq's Turkestan regional government? And more broadly, as regional states take on a greater role in managing Kurdish issues, how might this reshape regional security and relations among Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria?
Well, I think actually the SDF's dissolution is something irreversible because its military branches has been collapsed under the attacks of Syrian government. It has been collapsed for nearly 1 year. So they have no choice. So this announcement of this solution is kind of the final result of this military failure and the final result of the growing, as we mentioned, the capabilities to maintain stability as well, maintain the control over the country of the Syrian government led by al-Sharaa. So I think, of course, it will have a lot of influences over the Kurds in Turkey, over the Kurds in Iraq, as well as in Iran. But we cannot forget that even inside the Kurds themselves, they have different branches. They have different ideologies. We cannot say that the Kurdish camps inside the northern Syria are the Kurds who control the northern Iraq. They have different camps. They have different ideology. They have different political principles and political ideas. My simple answer is that different Kurdish people, they have different camps. They belong to different regional politics. We cannot say that maybe this will influence the other Kurds. I don't think it's an easy answer.
It's very complicated still. And lastly, Dr. Wang, very briefly, what should we watch for next? Could this dissolution of the SDF mark a turning point toward a more unified and stable Syria?
I think it's the turning point, as you mentioned, a very important turning point, or not just a turning point. I call it kind of a milestone, which suggests that the Syrian government led by al-Sharaa actually they made a very successful breakthrough from which the Syrian maintenance could be further maintained and the Syrian inclusiveness could be further updated. So this is something very important. The SDF was a very important branch, but now their dissolution suggested that the decreasing power of the area camps inside Syria and the growing capabilities of the Syrian central government. So I think it's not only suggested that what is for the Syrian peoples themselves, but also it means a lot for the future political arena inside Syria.
Dr. Wang Jing, Middle East expert in Xi'an, China, speaking with my colleague Xia Wen. This is World Today. Stay tuned. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. China has set a dedicated chapter on autonomous vehicles in draft revision to the country's road traffic safety law. The draft defines autonomous vehicles and driver assistance functions, clarifies the conditions for autonomous vehicles to hit the roads, sets principles for handling traffic violation, and outlines insurance policies for such vehicles. It stipulates that when a traffic safety violation occurs while a vehicle's autonomous driving function is activated, the vehicle's manufacturer or importer should be responsible for handling the violation. The draft has been submitted for its first reading to the ongoing session of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, China's top legislature. So joining us now on the line is Professor Jiang Gong from the University of International Business and Economics. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure.
So is this marking a key step towards clearing regulatory hurdles to wider commercialization of the autonomous driving systems?
Absolutely. I think one of the necessary hurdles that has to overcome is the issue about insurance, right? I think this regulation makes it very clear who will be responsible for the insurance, who will be responsible for any accidents or traffic violations, anything of that nature. So I think it just moves a lot of uncertainties and make the rollout of autonomous driving more practical and more convenient. And it looks like it's going to go through this.
Okay. So when the law requires manufacturers to not consider responsibilities for the operation of any vehicle's autonomous driving functions, what could be its implications for automakers?
I think at least I can think of two implications. One is that the automakers have to be very honest about the functions of their vehicles are bringing to the customers. I think in the past we have seen sort of over promotion, over advertising, over promise of the autonomous driving functions. Actually, the idea about autonomous driving is this very strict technical definition. You have the L2, L3 level, L3, L4 level. It's a very technical definition, and consumers have no idea about this, right? So when you as a automaker, when you say, well, we're going to offer autonomous driving, what does that mean, right? So I think it's just causing a lot of confusion. I think this regulation makes it very clear what it really means and the obligations on the part of automakers. The second thing, of course, is about the responsibilities, right? Since the driver is really not in control. I mean, I think the driver is a misnomer in this case. I mean, he's not really driving the car. He's not even in control of the car. So I think this makes it very clear that the party that is in control of the car, in this case, is the manufacturer, for example. He is going to be responsible for it. So I think it's actually quite straightforward. It's kind of natural, and it's just the way it should be.
Yeah. BYD has already announced that it will cover any costs from traffic accidents when BYD's God's Eye advanced driver assistance system is in operation. I mean, an EV giant like BYD, for sure, it believes that it can easily afford any such costs. But what about for smaller automakers?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think the BYD system in English probably better be translated as the eyes from above system, I guess. I don't think that BYD has any intention of referencing to God. Nevertheless, I think it's a very good system. I look at the reported news about the system, customers' feedback, shows that it's actually a very good system. Like BYD, the company is confident enough to say that we're going to bear the burden, bear the costs, cover the costs from traffic accidents or traffic violations. So this is a very, very positive step in the right direction. It differentiates the company's position from other competitors. I think it shows BYD's real confidence in their products. I think it sets a very good example, and this is the way it should be going.
Now, in China's auto market, even electric vehicles priced as low as 60,000 yuan or some 8,900 US dollars nowadays tend to be equipped with some basic autonomous or automated features, although many of them still require their drivers to keep their hands on the wheel all along at all times. What do you make of this rising consumer demand for autonomous driving?
Well, I think at the end of the day, people are lazy, I guess. It's just human nature. I think, people, and they also like multicasting. People are very busy these days. They have their handsets in their hands all the time. They have their eyes on the handsets. They probably be talking on the phone. They might be tending to kids. They may be, carrying a conversation over the phone, and a lot of things they're doing. If the car can drive for itself safely, provided safely, so be it. I don't mind yielding control of my car to the robot, to the autonomous driving system. Nevertheless, my advice to consumers is to be very, very, very careful. I think the here issue is safety. You can't afford any margin of error here because we're talking about life and death situation. I would be very conservative about totally yielding myself to the control of the vehicle by the system, not by myself. You never know what's going to happen, right? And also, I think usually in an earlier stage, in the nascent stage of a entirely new and revolutionary technology development, I'm not so confident that it's all the bugs are already phased out. There are things that that people who design the system never thought about, right? There might be very esoteric conditions that they've never thought about. If you look at the rollout of any new technology, I think in early days, there are these very tragic accidents. People are paying a painful lesson for this. I would be very conservative.
Okay.
I would wait a little bit longer to see that the system is really bulletproof until I fully buy into this. That would be my advice to future consumers.
Okay, thank you. So, Professor, we still have about 1 minute before we need to wrap up. So, in your opinion, how should insurance policies for autonomous vehicles look like, briefly?
Well, one thing I can predict is that it's going to be a lot cheaper. I think machines tend to be very rational. They don't hurry. They don't have any emotion. They don't curse, for example. They don't hurry. They make the right decisions all the time. They optimize things. Put it this way. Now humans are sort of emotional, right? They might do crazy things. So I think in terms of the probabilities of making errors, definitely machines make fewer errors than human beings. So I think the probability of engaging in an accident gotta be going down, and this translates into lower premiums, lower payouts for accidents, and overall it should be reflected in the premium for the insurance. So
Okay. Thank you very much. That was Professor Zhang Gong from the University of International Business and Economics. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. Bye for now.